Okay, so I think that's me. That's my cue. Hello, good afternoon, welcome. Day two, IBC 2014. We're going to be looking at Flame Premium 2015 Extension 2, mainly in the context of the new features. I'm going to try and throw in a load of the new stuff that we've done with this latest version. We're going to do it in the context of a couple of jobs. One done by a company in Germany called Velvet for a water called Matoni, and I have to thank them very much for the footage. Really nice footage. I'm going to play this back, and then we're going to look at a couple of things, and then yeah, we'll do that.
You're blue and you don't know where to go to. Why don't you go where fashion sits? Putting on Ritz.
Tony is over.
Putting on the Ritz. Now if you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where fashion sits? Putting on the Ritz.
Back to nature.
So there we go, perfectly clear. It's all about water. This is kind of a nice little piece. It's got a whole bunch of stuff in. And where we're going to start really with this is the conforming stage. We want to look at a couple of things with the conform. You can see over here I've got an empty conform reel, and what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to jump into the media hub here, and I'm just going to show this. There's a couple of ways of doing conforms in here, but I quite like doing it this way, and that is that you grab it here, you tell it to link to the media files, which you give it an idea of where those exist, and then you sort of drop it here, and it does the conform for you. I just quite like showing that because it's pretty cool. And there's your timeline, okay? So there's a load of ways I could do that would make it look a lot more complex, but I just decided I'd just do it the simplistic way, and you can just sit there and appreciate it. So this is kind of nice. This makes a little timeline for me. I can go through there, and I can see there's a few little holes and stuff in there, but for the moment that doesn't matter. We can always come back later on and fix those holes. Actually, what we want to do here is look at it in a slightly different context. We're going to look at some of the actual creative stuff that was done. One of those is actually just sitting in the timeline here, and it's going to allow me to look at some of the new stuff we've done with Extension 2. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come into here. I'm going to add what we call a BFX, and we're going to just drop this into here like so. If I just drop in a little action node here, add a layer. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a quick look at a new thing in Flame 2015 Extension 2, and that is the concept of the planar tracker. Now, the planar tracker exists all over the system now, okay? So it exists in the garbage masks. You can use it in the axis, but you can also use it in perspectives and things like that. And we're going to look at that as we go through. But in this regard, I'm just going to literally pull it in here. I'm going to just draw in a little thing here. So obviously, we're going to be doing some sort of skin cleanup here. Now, it seems a little bit unfair on this girl because she doesn't look like her skin is dreadful, but hey, it's the world we live in, right? Beauty is everything. And what we'll do is we're just going to select this like so, and I'm going to jump into here, and you'll see that I have a tracking option in here. Inside there I have this thing called the planar tracker, and if we just set this to high sampling, and we're just going to analyze this forward, and you can see what's kind of nice about this is I can sort of go to different parts of this. I can snap into different areas. I can track a bit backwards, a bit forwards, and basically what it's going to do is it's just going to go in and do that track for me. Okay, now what's really nice about this is the axis is actually intelligent enough to understand that whilst it's actually taken the shape to create the track, it doesn't mean that I can't just come in here and just move these around to the positions that I want. I actually want it to take into account. Now you can see I've actually added a point in there, but that's not a massive problem. I can always just go back and sort of get rid of that. And what this will do is it allow me to actually track things pretty quickly, pretty solidly, but in the context of the sort of shape that I actually want. Now what I really want to do here is actually add in some softness. So the way I'm going to do that is by adding a 3D shape. I'm going to make the garbage mask the sort of parent of that. And what we're going to do is just going to soften off these edges a little bit. Make sure in here that I'm looking through the renderer. And you can see that again now what I get is something like this. Now what's really smart about this is I can actually then reproject the material back through that 3D shape. And with the projection, you can then start doing some pretty smart stuff. So in this case, I'm just going to soften it off. And you can see that very quickly, she's got really smooth skin. Okay, so this is kind of a nice way of doing these things. What's also quite nice is that you can then use these for like sort of look development. Okay, so this is very much a skin smoothing sort of demonstration. But actually, I can do some other things with this. If I actually add a second 3D shape here, and I come in and I'm just going to draw in a pretty spurious mask, so something like this. Nothing particularly sort of clever about that. But again, if we go into here, and again this time still using the G mask, I just go in and we set a few options in here. You can see that I can literally just kick it off and it will go off and it will do its best to follow the things that I've specified, okay? Now, in this case, it might not be perfect, but it actually doesn't matter because we're only going to use it for kind of, like I say, sort of look development. So we use exactly the same thing in here. We'll soften off the edges somewhat because we just want to kind of do something like so. And again, we'll just reproject the media. So we're projecting back on top. And this time, what it's going to allow me to do now is I can start lightening her hair. So sort of giving her almost like highlights, okay? Now, the nice thing about this is that it allows me to then, using things like lights and various other bits and pieces, I can start maneuvering these in the context of the scene. So we'll have one that maybe lights the scene in its entirety. And this one here is actually just going to be linked to this 3D shape. And you see that now I actually have a way of really coming in and sort of dialing down that information. If I come into there and pick maybe a color from the background, it really starts sitting in a bit better. And obviously we take that down a little bit like that, and you can see that very quickly using these this new mechanism, this sort of 3D shape, but in the context of the planar tracker, I can create something that's really quite sort of unique looking. Nice thing about it is you can see how quick it is. Okay, I'm literally just scrubbing through this. There's no rendering. I'm not caching to RAM. I'm not doing any of that stuff. Okay, and also this is full res, so there's no proxies here. We're doing it all as you see it. Okay, and this is very important to what we're sort of talking about. So if we actually take this on a stage further, and I can show you kind of what we did with this in a kind of bigger context. If I just come to the bottom here and we pull this one up, it's exactly the same premise, but this time you see that I've done a little bit more work. So in here, if we just put in that one and I can actually look at the mat. So you can see that side by side, we've actually gone through and done significantly more work in there. It's exactly the same concept, but actually now if you look at her skin, it looks unnaturally smooth and everyone's happy. Okay, so you can see that in here, we can also then stick in some regrain at the end and we start getting back to a sort of point where, you know, you might start believing that that's her real skin. What I've also got in here is another example of this 3D sort of planar tracker, which is really quite smart. And I'm not going to sort of dwell on this too much because it's really just it's a kind of a throwaway thing, but it's a really nice example of the sort of things you can do with this now. We have a zebra, obviously. No commercial is complete without a zebra. And in there, what I've actually done is I've actually tracked on the bicubic here. Okay, so those of you that have been using Flame for a while may have seen a demo slightly akin to this back in the day where we had a cheetah and we used to write on him. But this is much, much easier than that demo was. That used to take ages to set up. This is actually very easy. You go in, you put this on there, and you track it in. And what that allows us to do is to then start putting in things like logos on the side of zebras. You know, the sort of stuff you do day in, day out. All around the world. So there, yeah, there you go. And no one would ever know that wasn't real. Okay? So this is kind of the idea. We just sort of, we're trying to look at the sort of tracking mechanism in a slightly different way, and you kind of, you see what we're doing here. So what I'm going to do here is actually, I'm going to get rid of that, and we're actually going to look at another job as well, so that we have to say thanks to the guys at Velvet for that work. It's really, really nice. There's actually a customer demo that's being done on that footage if you want to see a bit more. But we're actually going to look at this job here as well. And the reason being is that, again, it kind of lends itself very much to the Flame sort of mechanisms and the way that we want to sort of look at stuff. I'm going to play this back. This was done by Frame Store in London. We have to say thank you very much to them and to the BBC for allowing us to use this. I'm just going to play this back and you'll have an idea of what I'm talking about. Okay, so this is EastEnders. It's a nice, happy-go-lucky program that we have in England. Kids, families love it. What I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to look at a couple of things. First and foremost, this is the conform, as you can see at the bottom here. I'm going to start with this very simple shot. The reason being is that I would just kind of really like to build these demos up. So you start with something a little bit simpler, so you can see what the sort of tools in the Flame allow you to do in a kind of a simplistic way, and then we'll look at the kind of more complex stuff as we go through. Here, what I've got is the ability to come in here and just add an action to the timeline. And what's quite nice is it allows me at this level, it's a kind of an A over B comp, but it's in the context of all the 3D tools that Action brings to the party. So with this particular example, what I've basically got in here is the spider in the foreground and the lady in the background, okay? And the idea is that we're going to start just sort of combining those together, but we're going to use a couple of different ways of doing that. In here, I've basically got a G mask, okay? And if we look at the result in here, this is just a plane. I can rotate this and I can maneuver it in 3D, but fundamentally, if I just rotate it like this and we just soften it off slightly, you can see that very quickly what I'm doing is I'm just maneuvering this into a position where we can actually start sort of putting these two in context. Now, again, it's not a particularly exciting comp, but it does give us the ability to just look at a couple of things. In here, what I want to do is actually set this up so that, the background is all blurred. And what I quite like about this is that it shows you how quickly we can do these things, okay? So the system is really, I'm just setting a couple of keyframes in here, and you can see that as we go through, what I'm going to have is the spider blurring out in the foreground. And what you start creating is very quickly, you start creating this sort of push zoom that is kind of the feel behind this whole piece. What's also quite nice about that is because it is all in sort of 3D and that we're actually sort of compartmentalizing this, that the light in here can actually then start affecting just the spider in the foreground. So we can actually sort of crank that up a bit, set a few keyframes again, and by the end here we can actually have this sort of dialed down a bit. And what you're going to start getting is that to kind of accentuate this sort of push, pull, zoom, whichever way around you want to think of it, but that's the idea, okay? And again, you can see how quickly I'm doing this. I'm just scrubbing through it. It's kind of updating. Again, really just a testament to the power of the Flame and how it works in the context of these things. So this is very much a basic example. The nice thing about this is if I did want to take this and get a little bit more sort of into it, or you can see here, I can promote it into what we call batch effects, and batch effects has all these tools, so I can go in and I can be a lot more kind of sort of involved in that if necessary. Now we're going to look at two other shots, and they're kind of a bit more complex, these other shots. So one of them is this shot here, which is basically, it's the shot of this lady Jane, and she's basically carrying a Hoover and stepping out into the street, and it all looks a little bit dodgy and insidious. And the reason being is that it's all dirty and there's newspaper everywhere and everything's a bit foreboding. But if you actually look at the original plates, it doesn't really look like that at all. It's actually quite basic. So what we're going to do is we're going to just kind of try and build up a bit of this just to show you how these sort of things are kind of achieved through the Flame and some of the new features that allow these sort of things to be a little bit easier than they might have been in the past. So if I come into here, this is the original shot. The first thing I really want to do is isolate the sky. Now, there's a couple of ways I could do that. I'm actually just going to use a 3D tracker to do that for the moment. If we come into here and if I just kick this off, it's going to go through and do this whilst I sort of carry on babbling on. But the idea is that we're going to try and isolate a camera so that we know what's going on in the scene. And with that camera, we can then start attaching things to it and actually isolating different parts of the image. So you see that whilst I was just explaining that, it's gone through and done it. This is kind of cool. And if we look at the sort of 3D tracking view here, you can sort of go through and sort of scrub through and sort of say, okay, well, this is great. I know that this is the point I want to use because I want to isolate the pub here. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to take that and I'm going to create a point locator. So that point locator can be used for a whole bunch of things. But in this example, what we're going to do is we're actually going to attach a garbage mask to it. So if I just drop that in here like so, and if we come into this view, I'm just going to move this up so I can grab it. And what we can do is we can snap this to that point before we even draw the mask. Now, the reason for that is because now anything I draw will always be centered on that point. So it will always move in context of my camera move, okay? So again, very quickly, we've taken something, we've applied a camera move, and then I've started drawing these things. Now, I'm actually doing this really just to kind of try and isolate the sky up here. So I'd obviously make this white. I cut out a few other bits and pieces. But there's also something else I want to show. Bearing in mind that we've actually 3D tracked this scene, okay? So there's already a track involved. I actually want to show you just adding in maybe a perspective grid as well. So if we come into here, we've got these new perspective grids. They can do a whole bunch of things, but like I was saying at the very front, you can actually assign them now to a tracked camera. So the idea is that here, if I go to the perspective grid view and I actually decide, well, this window here is going to be something that I want to try and isolate as well, we can actually just come into here, use the little magnifying options, so something like so. And I can set this up like this. Again, inside the perspective grid, like we have with the garbage masks, we have the tracker here. So again, I can set these things to sort of be, various options. And you can see in here what it will do is it will actually reference that point, not only at the first frame, but also at all of the ensuing frames. So it's actually intelligent enough to update the source as it goes along. And what we'll get is something like this. Now, this means that if I now start adding garbage masks into onto there, anything that I now draw in the scene will always be attached to that grid, okay? And although I've already got a tracked camera, Flame is intelligent enough to actually extrapolate the data from the new camera and actually put it into perspective in here. So now what we start getting is a whole bunch of different things in context of one another. And you can see here that those two different mechanisms to draw those garbage masks, but both work the same. Now, the reason I'm doing this, it's probably a very elaborate way of coming up with something that looks a little bit more like this, which is a whole bunch of G-masks in context of a 3D track. But the reason is because I want some of them to occlude, some of them to hold out, some of them to actually be applied to one another so that we can create a garbage mask, basically. Now, the reason I want a garbage mask is because then in here I can grab this out, we can replace this setup, and I can show you exactly what we're going to do with that garbage mask. So this is what we have here. Down the bottom here, we have kind of a technical grade. So we wanted a little bit more sort of exposure in the sky because we want to use it in the final comp. And then what we do is we can go through and we can look at these things in context. So if I just pull this up over here, we've got a bit of a grade that basically isolates the luminance in there. We recomp it with the plate from in here, and then we start just giving it an output like so. The long and short of this is as we come downstream, what it's allowed me to do is kind of isolate the sky. But not only that, it's isolated it in the context of the move. Okay, so what happens is that then as we go through and we start rebuilding this scene, you see we get a bit of a hoover there that's also been tracked with the plain old tracker. We then have the back plate, and then we just add in a few other bits and pieces. And gradually we start building this up. If we look at this in context now, you can see why we've done that. It looks a lot more foreboding. It looks a lot more moody. And we actually start getting to a point where we can start working on the other problems here. Now, the other problems, or the major problem, is the fact that this is a scene that is moving in perspective. And actually, what we really want to do here is put the litter, which is actually a completely different source over here. We want to put the litter into the shot. Now, you can see the problem is that there's no movement here, okay, so it's been locked off, and actually this shot has quite a defined move in it, so we have to work out a way of actually combining these two things. So if I pull this source in, what we're going to do is we're going to add another action node, and I'm going to add a couple of outputs. This one's going to come in here, this one's going to come in here, and actually what we're going to have is in there, we're going to have the two things in context of one another, and you can see straight away that they're never really going to match up, okay? We've got a bit of an issue. The first thing I'm going to do is come into here and using a blend mode in difference. I'm just going to put these two as close as I can together, okay? So we know that the cars sort of match up, but that I'll have to do for the moment. If I now hide that, I'm just going to split these views. We'll put the schematic this side, put the result in this side. And what we want to do is we want to track this shot here. So I'm just going to jump into the G masks. And we're going to add the G mask in here, okay? And actually, let's just do, we'll just do this. So in the G mask, I'm now just going to draw that in, but I'm going to draw in the bit that I want to remove, okay? And that's this bit at the bottom here. If we just kick that off, and again, there's a bunch of things I could do here, but for the moment, we'll just analyze that forward. So what it's going to do is it's going to take this image, and it's going to apply the track to that image. And what we're going to do is we're going to try and use the perspective shift that is created from the track to apply to the new image. With a bit of luck, it might work. You never know. But actually, what I need to make sure is that rather than doing it in the garbage mask, what I actually need to do is I need to do it in the axis. Okay, so if I come into here, we go to the planar track, and again, making sure I've got perspective turned on, I'll just try that again. Now, the other thing about this is that whilst it is quite a sort of uniform move, it doesn't really matter if I don't track the whole thing, because the system is intelligent enough to kind of take what I've done and then interpolate and extrapolate the data for the rest of it. So you can see that very quickly I've kind of gone through and actually got a bit of a move. It kind of goes a bit wonky at the end, but that's okay, because we'd actually go through and we can always revisit that. So basically what I've got here now, if we just deactivate the mask for a minute, you can see that fundamentally what I've done is I've kind of gone through and I've tracked this thing. Now, if we unhide this here, you can see that that is the thing that I want to attach it to. And if I take the information and I attach it in there, what we're basically going to get is this. Okay, let's just make sure that that is turned off. Okay, so basically what we're going to get is this shift. Okay, now what that's going to do is it's going to basically mimic the perspective shift of the road. And so what we should find is if we activate the mask and we turn it inside out, and we make sure that it's attached to this image here, what you'll see is very quickly, I've now put in the new road into the other shot. Now, obviously, there are some problems. You probably wouldn't get away with that, okay, depending on your audience, but I reckon someone would spot that. You can obviously go in here. We can soften this off a bit if you just, if you're worried about the edges of that. But fundamentally, we have got the biggest problem is with the actual, with the shot here. So what we would do is we would go in, and it's probably not that hard to rectify it, because actually all we need to do is go to this shot here, which is the original source, and we're just going to add in a second garbage mask to basically bring that information back in. So if we do something like so, what's kind of nice about this is I can attach that second garbage mask in here, and what it will do is it'll actually inherit the move in the same way, okay? So again, this is all done through this new planar tracker, and actually by attaching that in there very quickly, you can see that what I've done is actually just brought the wheels of the car back in. Yes, I know there's some problems. She's lost her feet. We're not going to get too sort of hung up on that at the moment. But the fundamentals of this are that the tools are there for me to do this quite complex stuff very, very quickly. Now, if we go a little bit further on with this, I am sort of flying through this because there's a lot of things to show. If I just come to the end here and just show you the final sort of version of this, what's really nice about this is just the way that this was kind of completed. So you see here, this is kind of the same thing with the feet and the cord for the Hoover put back in. But you'll see one of the problems is that things disappear behind the mask here. So then what we really have to do is take out a couple of different versions. So this is the comp. This is the one with the garbage masks applied, and this is actually just the sort of perspective shift that came from the planar track data. What's nice about that is we can then use that to sort of paint things back in. So you can see here I've done it in a kind of a way that you can see these. And basically what we've done is we've painted these back in using the sort of, if I show you it in context, you can see that here, this is the stuff that we're painting back in from downstream in the paint node here. The final part of this is to go to the end here, and yeah, of course I could render, but actually what I want to do is I'm actually just going to do what we call create a batch effect. Now, a batch effect is basically, you can think of it as like a pre-comp. Now, a pre-comp will allow me to go back to the desktop, like so, and if we just pull up the interface here, and I pull up my my actual comp here, my timeline, with the desktop, what I can do is I can actually go into the effect that I'm working on, and I can just grab out that batch effect. And what it's going to allow me to do is just drop it back into my existing timeline. And this is kind of the beauty of the new Flame, the way that it works with the kind of creative tools, but in the context of this sort of editorial pipeline. And you can see that now I've taken that, and even though this is unrendered, you can see that even that massive sort of setup can still be scrubbed through, and we can still look at it. Now, obviously, eventually I would go and render it, but for the moment, if I ever need to revisit it, I can always go back into the editor here, and it's always live, and I can go and make the changes that are necessary. So this is a really nice way of kind of approaching this sort of job, okay? You've got the power of the batch to actually do the effects work, but you've got the timeline to actually accommodate it. Now, the last thing I want to do here is look at this last scene. So you'll also notice that I'm not really switching desktops here. I'm actually just going to different reel groups, okay? And this is a really nice new feature in the 2015 extension 2 as well. So I can just switch between sort of different reel groups that exist on a single desktop. So it means I'm not constantly having to load, reload, delete. I'm just going to literally maneuver between them. So it's a really smart thing to do. So this was this is the last shot I'm going to look at. It's actually kind of my favorite shot. It's pretty full on, right? The idea was this is the original source, and what was created was this. Yeah. So it's quite different. Okay. Really what they needed was a static clean plate. What they got was something along these lines with a bin in the corner. There's a lot of movement in his hand. There's lots and lots of stuff going on. So the first thing we need to do here is work out a way to actually clean this up. So what I'm going to do is kind of drop this into batch. And again, this really shows the power of having the sort of batch and the timeline in context of one another. Here, this is currently 122 frames, as you can see here. But actually, I don't need nearly that much. What I really want is to pick it up just before he picks his head up, so probably somewhere around here. And I'm going to do it just after he's sort of picked his head up, so say maybe somewhere around there. We'll take those, we'll get rid of those, and if I select that and we just go to there, you can see when I come back into batch now, the sort of correlation between the timeline and the batch area means that this is now actually 44 frames, so I don't actually have to go off and reload it or anything like that. In fact, let's just make sure that we get rid of that stuff down there. Okay, perfect. So, hang on, I don't need that, don't need that, okay. So this is now 44 frames. I'm basically going to go into here. Now, I've got the bigger problem. How do I get rid of the rain? Now, I don't have time to sit here and rotoscope it out, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to use a node in here that doesn't get used very often by my reckoning, but it's actually very, very cool. It's called Recursive Ops. Now, Recursive Ops is exactly what it says on the tin. The idea is that at frame 1, you don't have anything because there's nothing to recursively operate. But on the second frame, on an additive, crumple, distort, blurred way, the frame before is applied, so on and so on and so on. It's a recursive operation, okay? And that's the name of the node. Now, that's all very well and good, but I don't want that, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn all of these things off. That actually, really all I want is I want it to really just get darker per frame. Okay, so you can see what happens is we start getting rid of the rain because actually in there is a clean frame. It's just hard to find. You can see that's the original, but you can see the problem is that this starts getting darker. Now, I don't want that. I want to maintain the grade, but I need to actually get rid of the rain. So we have to come to some kind of compromise. So the compromise is here is that we change the range. So what happens is over 4 frames, it gets rid of it, but on frame 5, we're back to the rain. How do we deal with that then? Well, if we cycle that, and we then come out to the batch and we add a render node, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to render that out, okay? So what happens is we get this, okay? So basically what's happening is that every 4th frame is clean, okay? When we come back to the timeline in here, this is my render. I'm going to make a new reel for the moment, and we can always go in and sort of hide these reels and whatever, but for the moment this will do. And we're actually going to use one of the older school sort of desktop tools, and we're going to call it, well, we're not going to call it deal. It is called deal. If I deal this here, what it does is it deals it into 4 clips, okay? A little bit like dealing cards. This is the 1st frame, and the 5th, and this is the 3rd, and this is the 2nd, but this is all of the 4th frames, okay? And what that means is that actually as we go through there, we've kind of got rid of a lot of the rain, okay? Now, the problem is that it's 11 frames. Now, this is where, again, the whole desktop timeline mechanism just comes into its own, because actually what I can do now is I can open that as a timeline. I can add a time warp, and there's a nice little feature in here called duration now that we can just say, well, I only want this to be 30 frames. I want the rendering set to interpolation and to be set to motion, estimation. And what it's going to do is when I render that, it will basically extrapolate those 11 frames out to 30 frames and sort of fill in the blanks for me, okay? So I've gone from having a very sort of, if we just remind ourselves of the original source, so you can see that in here, this is the original source. And now what we have is something that looks a little bit like this, okay? And that's kind of what we want. So we've actually got rid of a huge amount of the problems in there. So if we then go back into batch, and for the moment, I'll just get rid of that. And if we just pull up the thing that I've just made, so this is the 30 frames here, I'm also going to just pull across a static clean frame. So this is the clean frame. You can see it's just the 1st frame of this stuff. And now what we're going to do is we're going to start combining them. Now, first and foremost, there's still a few problems here. He's still wobbling, okay? I don't want that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to resize him, and then we're going to auto-stabilize him. So in here, in the resize mode, we're actually just going to use this little crop box to to kind of focus him in on the bit that we want to sort of we want to stabilize. So something like that. On the output, it's going to look like that, but we're going to just crop the output. In here, we're going to then stabilize him like so. And if we basically just look into if we just look into there, and we just kick off the stabilize, you'll see that it'll go off and it'll do that. And basically what's happening here is that we've got the everything going on to allow us to feed this into action, okay? So we add a couple of layers. This is the static frame. This is the max on top. And the idea is that then we can come into here and very quickly we can start putting him into position. Now again, like I did before, this is where the difference thing comes in really useful. I can literally pick it up and we can just sort of put him over the top until we sort of get it in the right position, something like so. And then we just stick it back into blend. So this is kind of now in position, but you'll see as we go through, there's still a bit of a problem in that it's still obviously been stabilized, but we have this little issue going on. So now if I split these views, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to apply a garbage mask. And again, this is just showing the kind of multifaceted nature of these garbage masks. So if I come into here and we just do like so, you'll see that if I start drawing, just giving him some goggles like this, what we should find is if we invert the garbage mask and then we tell it really just to kind of mask this guy, is that very quickly what we've done is we've created a kind of relationship between those two shots, okay? Again, if I remove that, you can see that very quickly we've taken the static in the background, we've cleaned it up, we've removed a lot of the problems, and now what we have is some frames where he actually looks like he is looking up, okay? Now, there's a couple of other things that we need to do here. First and foremost, I need to clean the backplate up before I dimensionalize this. So I haven't got time to do that. So what I've got is someone that's given me a BFX from Flare. And I've just brought that in. So it allows me to show you something else. If I just double click that, it takes me back to the timeline. And the great thing about this release, 2015 extension 2, is that now we support recursive batch effects. So the idea being that in here, if I look at this actual procedural composite, you can see that in here what we've done, we've cleaned up the back by isolating a bit here, kind of resizing it down, transforming it, and then putting it back over the top. And with a bit of paint, we start getting rid of him in the background. Now, if I wanted to add something else to that, I can come into here, go to the timeline, and I can add another batch. And we're kind of going down the stack now. We're just affecting the sources. And if I want to just kind of add in a bit of a blur to that, just to kind of make it like so, what will happen is as we go back up the batch tree, you'll see that now this has kind of inherited that blur. The nice thing about that is that I don't actually have to open it in batch. It can actually stay closed. So here it's still sort of compacted. And what that means is that we can then start putting that together in a slightly more sort of dynamic way. If we come into here, I'm going to feed this out as the foreground, and this is the background. And in here, we can then start putting those in context of each other. So this one here, we're just going to start cutting him out like so. And again, this is just using the garbage masks. He gets his head sort of cut out, but that's really just to do with the fact that in there, we just want that to be like so. And the idea is that I start building this up based on him being clean in the foreground and this being a clean background. So what we're going to do here is I'm just going to leap this on a few stages further and really just try and tie this up with by making sort of the rain and things like that. If we come to here and we just let's just go to there. Okay, so this is exactly the same thing, and what you'll see here is actually this is what I just did. The only real difference here is that we've already built him in kind of 3D. The idea is exactly the same. I've just cut him out. I've cleaned him up. His eyes still kind of come up like so, but we've just cut him out so that we can have some kind of parallax as we move through the scene, right? If I come to the result view here, what you'll notice is as I sort of scrub through the camera, you'll see that he looks a lot more sort of 3D because of the way we've changed the sort of scenery here. So this is really quite smart, okay? You can do some really kind of cool things with this. The final bit of this is really just to make the rain, because the rain is the last bit. And really the rain comes from the fact that I've made a very basic particle setup, okay? Again, this is sort of 3D particles. You can come in here and you can kind of move around them. But fundamentally, we're really just looking through a basic camera. And what I want to do is I actually want these flat for the moment. So we're going to come to the bottom here. I'm going to make a batch effect. And a batch effect is this sort of compartmentalization of that effect. If I then add in like a mux node or two here, what that's going to allow me to do is actually freeze these at different frames. So if I come to here, And let's just get that to be there. If we just put the result in here, with the mux node, what I can do is I can say freeze it at that frame. With this mux node, I can say freeze it at that frame. And the idea is that now as I go between those, we've got different versions of those, okay? Now, what's nice about that is that I can then start building the rain as I wish. So I would come into here, and maybe with this one here, if we just, again, split these views, I'm just going to put a bit of a blur in. So you can see I could really blur it, or I'm just going to put a little bit in for the moment, like so. And then we're going to add in what we call a matchbox node. Now, matchbox is basically open GLSL code. The idea being is that they can you can basically sort of write your own shaders if you feel that way inclined, okay? You can come into here. I can then take the blur as the matte, and I'm going to take max, the output, which is what we've created here, and so I'm going to take it as the foreground. And what happens is we get this, okay? So we're now using that little effect that I made, so it was that, through a blur into Matchbox. And what happens is you start getting these drops, okay? And this is really quite smart because you can start adding in sort of various things to this. We have a 2D transform, so if I want to start moving around my my effects there, I can literally just put this in context and I can go to the effect and I can start moving them around. I can also make it so that they are procedural. At the moment you see there, I lose them after a while. But actually if I stick this to repeat, these will exist forever, and I can actually just have these kind of raining on them. So this is a really nice way of actually setting up an effect like this. Again, if I just delete this for a second, and we're just going to kind of finish this off. And this is really just exactly the same concept, as you can see in here, but just with a bunch of these sort of set up. The final part of this is really just to kind of add those into my final scene, along with a few drops and a few bits and pieces. So if we split the views, this is my result. This is going to be my my action schematic here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start unhiding bits of the rain that we've kind of put in place already. And you can see what happens is we start building this really quite smart sort of 3D scene that as we maneuver the camera, it kind of maneuvers through the scene like so. And this is this kind of idea of dimensionalizing what is basically a flat plane. Not only have we taken all of the rain out, not only have we cut him out, not only have we sort of done a load of things with a load of different tools, but fundamentally we've recreated a scene pretty much from scratch, okay? And this is why Flame is such a great product, because you can do these things in a context like this, where you can actually see me do it. The final part of this is really just to go back to the batch and look at the outputs. There's this output, and there's also a sort of very basic Z-depth map there. And with that Z-depth map, we can take it into a depth of field node. And with the depth of field node, I can then just start putting in some sort of blur. So we give ourselves a bit of depth of field blur. And you can see in there that as I kind of move through this, it will actually update where the blur sits in the context of the camera. So you can see that actually the more I move it or the more I crank the blur in here, it will actually sort of update those things. If we go to the end frame, you'll see that actually what we've done is we've kind of moved through the scene, and actually it gives us a way of going in and saying, well, actually, I want those to be in context, or I want him to be in focus. And actually, in this particular regard, that's exactly what I want. So you can see that now he is focused, and that is our point. If we go back to our desktop, this is the rendered playout that we've created. And you can see in here that pretty quickly we've created something that really does have quite a lot of sort of elements to it. There's sort of tracking in there. There's some particles. There's a load of blurs. And again, the great thing about this is that we just sort of create this on the fly, and it's all kind of pretty smart. So that's kind of the end of my presentation, my voice, pretty much any kind of capability as I've got as a human being. What I will do is just leave you with the final, which is really is a fantastic piece of work. And we have to say thank you again to the guys at Fame Store in London. Thanks for listening. Please stick around. I think there's going to be a presentation for the Flame Award. There's champagne, but only for people that have a flame. The rest of you... oh, sorry, it's for everybody. That's why they don't let me talk about anything but flame. Thanks ever so much, and yeah, please hang out.